It's a cold night.
It must be cold.
Mr. Mace.
It's a spread.
Bilson's. I'd like to welcome you to this meeting of Council. This meeting will be live streamed and recorded, and the voices and images of those participating in the meeting and in the gallery may be captured as part of this recording. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay our respects to elders past and present. As councillors, we have all taken an oath to carry out our duties in the best interests of the people of Indigo Shire and to do this in a fair and impartial manner. We are all committed to exercising the Council's powers and functions to the best of our skills and abilities. Do we have any apologies or leave of absence? Do we have any declaration of conflict of interest? We have no letters regarding open forum or questions. Item 6, condolences. Councillor Murdoch.
Yes. I'd like to send a condolence letter to the relatives of Olive Nesbitt from Chiltern. She has been a stalwart of our community and in Red Cross for 60 years. She was the regional rep in Melbourne for many years and was the regional chairman for 24 years and the emergency liaison officer in Red Cross for 24 years. She was a wonderful person and, you know, the work that she did for the Red Cross was huge. So I'd like to send a letter of condolences under seal, please. I move that motion.
Would somebody like to second that? Seconded by Councillor Price. Is anybody against? Carried. A notice of recognition, Councillor Shepherd.
Yes, it's my great pleasure really to acknowledge Marie Tyrrell of Rutherglen, who recently received an award in recognition for her 50-year contribution to Red Cross. Marie's the group events manager. She bakes amazing slices and cakes for fundraising street stalls. She's catered for the blood bank and she's donated more than 100 times herself. She's a long-term volunteer for the SES, St Vincent de Paul, Rutherglen Show, etc, etc, etc. And at 87, Marie is still a valuable member and pillar of the community, and we just like to thank and recognise her for her volunteering work over many years. Can we send a letter of recognition?
Yes, we can. Under seal.
Under seal. Well, I would like to move that we send a letter.
Do we have a second?
Acknowledgement.
That's right, Councillor Goldsworthy. Is anybody against? Carried. Item 7, the recommendation is that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 25th of June 2019 as published on the council's website be confirmed. Somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Price, seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Is anybody against? Carried. Do we have any business arising from those minutes? No. Item 8.1 is a response to question on notice taken at the June council meeting in open forum from the CEO, Trevor Areno. It's in the agenda if anybody would like to look at it. Item 8.2 is a response to a question taken on notice at the June council meeting regarding the North East Catchment Management Authority depot purchase. It's in the agenda if anybody wishes to read it. Item 9, do we have any deputations or petitions? No. Item 10.1, the recommendation is that Council refuses application PP 180158.1 and the Council issue a notice of decision to refuse to grant an amendment to a permit on the following grounds. This is in regard to Bilson's Beverages Proprietary Limited. The grounds are the proposal would adversely affect the residential amenity of the surrounding area in terms of noise, hours of operation, potential patron numbers, patron behaviour, including noise, access and egress and car parking. 2, the proposal is inconsistent with the principles of orderly and proper planning. 3, existing noise-sensitive residential uses will not be satisfactorily protected from the unreasonable live music and entertainment noise associated with the proposed events. And 4, the extension of the red line area would have an unreasonable impact on the amenity of the area. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Goldsworthy. Seconded by Councillor Shepherd. Councillor Goldsworthy.
I'm actually disappointed that you put this application in as it is, Nathan. I appreciate that you were trying to put in something that was quite extensive in the hope that you would get something perhaps a little bit less delivered back from council. But if you heard anything from the neighbours from the last application, you would know that they're very concerned about this. I don't think your business has run long enough and you have completed enough of what's required of you for the previous application to put this application in good faith. I think 26 events in 1 year is far too much. Whether you like it or not, you're in a residential area or you're surrounded by a residential area, and there's a reasonable expectation that you won't impact adversely on the amenity of those that live around you. I appreciate that you could take this to VCAT and get it lesser conditions perhaps, but more than what you've got at the moment. I just ask that if you want the entire community barracking for your business, which I'd like to see, then you'll give careful consideration about any future application in relation to this.
Councillor Shepherd.
I really like what's happening at Bilson's, and I've gone along to quite a few. I've gone down to the whiskey bar, I've gone to the cafe. I think you're doing a great job. I think this application, though, was bigger than really what you expected to happen. And we have a large number of submissions against this, and you know why, in terms of the noise, the hours of operation, all the extra things you've asked for. I think there is a way of moving forward that we'd be happy to work with you on, and I'd appreciate you perhaps working with us on that, because it's a great business model, as you know. But and I understand you've got to make money too, but it's that thing of working with us around how we can manage that, the fact that there's residential next to you, but you've got obviously a business that you have to run.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Price.
Just to echo some of the sentiment from my fellow councillors, and really I think this application goes to what some of the residents raised with us the first time round, that they felt it was a bit of a slippery slope into what this venue could end up being, and I think that we're really hoping to find a balance between the residential area and this business, and I think that this application just completely disregards all of that.
Councillor Murdoch. Councillor O'Connor.
Look, unfortunately, I have to agree with my fellow councillors on this one, Nathan, but like them, I really commend what you're doing there, and I think this application was an overreach, and perhaps you were given bad advice, I'm not sure. But, I've had visitors recently who spent time at Bilson's and just were raving about it. So I think if we can find a way to support you in your business, taking into account the context of where it is, and really, being respectful of the people that live in that area, I think there is a way forward, and I think this was just a bridge too far, really, for that. So don't give up. Let's just see how we can really support you, as well as working in the interests of the rest of the community.
So, Councillor Murdoch.
Yeah, no, I must agree with my fellow councillors. I I admire somebody who's young and having a go. And, you know, in my day, I had hotels, and people didn't particularly take any notice of the people around them. And, you know, now I wish I did and had that sort of scrutiny that should be had with business, is that we've got to work together and make sure that you are successful, but also that the community around you feels successful as well, that they're not impinged on.
Would anybody else? Sorry, Councillor Trenery.
I'd just like to say, I'd hope there is a way around this. I'd hope Indigo Shire gets known for being an assistance to business, not a stopper to business. There's everyone talks about how good this project is, and I think we should be in there trying to facilitate this project. And I understand the reservations of the neighbours of it, but I really hope that moving forwards that we probably pay a greater attention to assistance to business.
Just before we go to Councillor Goldsworthy to sum up, I'd just like to say that you purchased a rundown heritage building and you breathed new life into it. It's become a tourist attraction for this town. It's unfortunate that this won't get up. I know that you put in an amendment to the amendment on the 7th of June, and the timeframes were certainly against you. But I hope you don't give up, and it'll be a real success story, I've got no doubt. And we're very grateful for your investment. Councillor Goldsworthy.
I think to sum up on what we've all said, basically we wish you well, but we wish you well with your neighbours, not against them.
I now put the motion. Is anybody against the motion? Carried. If any of you would like to leave at this stage, you're more than welcome to, if you've come especially for that item on the agenda. Otherwise, we'll continue. Item 10.2. The recommendation is the Council approves a heritage loan for the amount of $20,000 for the replacement of 4 front windows, 2 side windows and roofing at 161 High Street, Rutherglen. The former was Rutherglen Courthouse. This loan will be over a period of 3 years at an interest rate of 1% in keeping with the Council's heritage loan policy. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Councillor Shepherd, seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Councillor Shepherd.
This $71,000 that we have was granted to us a while ago from the state government, so it's not using our money, and it's just great to see that we've got an application for it, and for such a great building that needs restoration. So I just at 1%, it's as interest rates lower, the 1% isn't looking as exciting as it once did, but it's still great that we're able to assist with some funding for this renovation.
Councillor Murdoch.
Yeah, I reiterate that, and we have had this scheme going for quite some time, right back in the very early days. I think there's a few councillors can remember, and people have taken it up and it has made a difference for them and they've paid it back, which means that it's circular. When it gets paid back, then it can be let out again for someone else. But I think this is a really good use of the heritage money. Thank you.
Would somebody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Price.
Just to say that I think it's really good that Council is able, through this loan scheme, is able to support the applicant, because the works are quite huge in cost and it's a massive undertaking for them. But with heritage being such a strong point within our Shire, we really appreciate them doing the work to that building.
Would somebody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Shepherd. I now put the motion. Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 10.3, the recommendation is that Council notes the Kew Springs Water Extraction Facility Monitoring Report contact and the action undertaken where required. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Shepherd, seconded by Councillor Price. Councillor Shepherd.
As you can see, it's compliant with no issues reported, and it's something that comes regularly to Council. So we just like to, move the motion and have it accepted. Thanks.
Councillor Price? Councillor Shepherd? Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 10.4, the recommendation is the council accepts the attached Assembly of Councillor records. Somebody like to move that? Moved by Councillor O'Connor, seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Councillor O'Connor.
This is just in accordance with the Local Government Act that this be in the agenda. So for anyone that's interested, there's a list of the council briefings and meetings that we've had as an Assembly of Councillors.
Councillor Murdoch. No, I'm not. That explains it all. Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 11.1, the recommendation is the council adopts the Beechworth Railway Precinct Land Management Plan of July 2019. Councillor O'Connor.
I'd like to move that we defer this. The reason being that we're in conversation with DELP at the moment about that railway land, and until those details are more fleshed out and we've, those conversations have continued, then I think it's not the right time to make the decision on this. So I'd rather wait till we'd had that.
Do we have a seconder?
That process.
Just seconded by Councillor Goldsworthy. Councillor O'Connor.
Oh, that's it.
I think it's
I think I just explained it. Sorry.
Goldsworthy.
Oh, look, I think we'd like to get it back. I'd like to come back to council as soon as possible, but it really depends on when the DELP discussions have been finalised. So as soon as that's completed, we bring it back to council. And council be briefed on that in the meantime. Yeah. To defer it until such time as the... Well, I haven't got a date. Do you want a date? Yeah, until something like that. Yeah, I don't mind.
Until you receive a satisfactory response.
Sorry. I move that we defer this motion until such time as the discussions that are currently underway with DELP have been finalised. Thank you, Councillor.
Is anybody against the motion? Carried. So is that deferred to a date to be fixed, CEO?
No, it doesn't need to have a date. Just as long as that condition's met, then we'll bring it back when that condition's been met.
All right, item 12.1, the recommendation is the council notes the submissions received in relation to the draft climate change policy and endorses the officer comments and recommendation. 2, that council adopts the climate change policy 2019 version 2.3. Somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Shepherd, seconded by Councillor Goldsworthy. Councillor Shepherd.
It's great that this has gone out to the community. I think we ratified it at the last meeting we had, but we've sent it out there for feedback, and we've got some great feedback. I did. I've got lots of comments, lots of support around this. As you know, as you read, we don't have to have a climate change policy as such. So the fact that we're doing it, I think, shows great leadership, and also is really a thank you too for the Environment Advisory Committee, who have done a great deal of work around this area, and we look forward to being able to put this into effect and take it through all of our decisions in council.
Councillor Goldsworthy.
This document goes to the future of our Shire and our country, really, and the world. We've got to look beyond ourselves and look to the future, I think, and this is a start to doing that.
Councillor O'Connor.
This policy has been drafted with input from people with a great deal of knowledge and commitment to the environment and to the community. The impact of climate change is truly frightening, and it's very important that Indigo Shire has a policy that directs council and reassures the community that we are mindful of how significant this is, and that we are thinking about local implications and what we can do at our level of government to ensure that our communities are as safe as possible.
Councillor Price.
I'd just like to thank those people that did make a submission, because we had 10 submissions in support, but we had an additional 28 that offered recommendations and additional comments, and I think that shows that we really do have the buy-in of the community around this climate change policy. And I think with all of the discussion that's happening at the moment around climate change policy, and the fact that it can be really doom and gloom, it's really important that we own our place in this and put a policy in place to say this is the steps that we're taking, when people are so often saying there's no leadership on this issue.
Would somebody else like to speak to this motion? I've got a question for the CEO. Is Indigo Shire the only council in North East Victoria that has a climate change policy?
I don't know the answer to that, Mr Mayor, I'm sorry. If there are my colleagues able to hazard a guess to it, I haven't made that inquiry.
My guess is no, but I couldn't quote which other councils, but I feel we're not the only one.
Did you just say that you don't think we're the only one in North East Victoria? That was my question.
Yeah, I think that's the answer, but I'm not certain of the answer.
Which answer is that, yes or no? Well, I should say he doesn't know. So, CEO, we don't know?
We don't know, Mr Mayor, sorry, we didn't make that inquiry.
Councillor Trenery.
I do have a question, actually, because under the financial implications, the policy does not propose any specific initiatives that involves a budget. So what exactly are we doing? If it does involve a budget and it's not going to cost anything, what exactly is this policy going to do? And if it is going to do something, where is the money coming from?
Would you like to answer that, Councillor Shepherd?
Just wondering, have you read the policy?
Yeah, in detail. That's why I'm asking if we're going to be right across every aspect of this council. Why is there not a budget? And if we don't, if we're not going to do anything that's going to cost money, what exactly are we going to do?
The thing is, at this stage, we have to look at every decision we make with a climate change outlook, and that's what this policy asks us to do in council, is to address everything we look at with an eye to climate change. So that's mitigating for all the things around climate change that we need to be concerned about. And people talk about roads, rates and rubbish for council, and roads, rate and rubbish are our area, but certainly climate change will have a great effect on them as well. So it's really saying to our council, to our management, to our staff, to our community, that we're going to be looking at our decisions with the lens of climate change.
I didn't think that question would open up the debate again, but probably expected. That it says it doesn't involve a budget, so I was just wondering what we're actually going to do. I think we're already in that budget. Well, supposedly not spending the money is $10,000 and finding out where our footprint is to start off with. Is that not the case?
Yes, that's the beginning. We're starting with it. We're going to work out our baseline for our emissions plan, and then we'll look forward as to how we can reduce our emissions. So we'll have a consultant come in and look at, firstly, at what our emissions are across our whole council, and then we'll look at how we can an action plan around that.
I would have thought $10,000 was a budgeted item, but that was the question that I was asking. I think what we could be talking about, if we're having a sensible conversation around it, is going to cost money, but the mitigation will probably save us money in the long run. But I think we should be open and honest with people and talk about the costs as well as the benefits.
Can I ask a question, Mayor?
Certainly, Councillor.
So if we're doing budgeting, just in line with what Councillor Trini just said, I'd be interested in the costs of not taking action on climate change. As you rightly said, it'll probably cost us more, but I think it would be interesting, and I have seen some figures that estimate costs in terms of damage to infrastructure, cost to life, cost to the health budget. And so I don't know how we actually do work that out specifically for Indigo Shire, but I think in any cost analysis we have to look at both the dollar cost and the cost of not taking action. So if we're going to look at budgets, I'd like to include that as part of the budget estimation.
Mr Mayor, my question was, and I accept what Councillor O'Connor said, but my question was that it's saying here it doesn't involve a budget, but clearly we're spending extra money. So it would have been nice to have it in there, and I can understand the debate on the other side on that as well, but we should be open and honest and transparent.
So you're asking for the cost to Indigo Shire if regarding climate change, and do you want the CEO to bring that back to council? Is that what you're asking?
I think, no, what I'm saying is that as we look at budgeting for this, that we include in those budgeting measures equally the cost of inaction. So in other words, if we're going to spend money on upgrading to renewable energy on certain buildings, for example, I'd like to see what the cost is if we don't do that in a longer term way.
Are you across that, CEO?
Thanks, Mr Mayor, for the questions. This is a question that won't have an answer, a direct answer. So as it says in the report, there's no specific action plan or strategy attached to this policy. And I think as Councillor Shepherd's mentioned, it's more about raising awareness and looking at further future decisions through the lens of climate change. So it's virtually impossible to say what the impact of this would be on costings, because there's a myriad of decisions to come that will be looked through a different lens, and we can't really say what's the difference between this or that course of action depending on which lens we put on. There's no costable outcome from this policy. I think my assumption is the question from Councillor O'Connor was more of a rhetorical one, to say if you're going to look at costs, then you should also look at the cost of not following the policy. But I don't believe I come back with any specific costings that say what's the costing of this policy, because basically what you're saying is what's the implications of looking through all future decisions through this lens. There's no answer to that. How long's a piece of string is the answer to it.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Shepherd.
It's evident that the Indigo Shire community is highly engaged with climate change and supports the action by council to reduce emissions and support the community to adapt. So I'd like to move this motion.
Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 12.2, the Environment Strategy. The recommendation is the Council notes the submissions received in relation to the draft Environment Strategy and endorses the Officer comments and recommendations and adopts the Environment Strategy 2019.
I'd like to move an amendment to that. I'd like a third dot point. I'd like that third dot point to read that Goal 1 on page 4 should read, our council will aspire to a net zero greenhouse gas emissions and our communities are resilient in the face of changing climate and more extreme climatic events. So effective, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Could you repeat that? Or perhaps the Executive Officer could read back that, no, she didn't get it either. I wouldn't mind writing it down. I couldn't quite catch it.
That Goal 1 on page 4 read, our council will aspire to a net zero greenhouse gas emissions and our communities are resilient in the face of changing climate and more extreme climatic events.
Could you read that back?
I will send it to you.
No, if we're going to debate it, I'd like it in the minutes. What is the start of it?
The goal 1 on
that we aspire.
Yep.
So it's aspirational.
Yes.
Yep.
Here it comes. Effectively, I'm just removing the words by 2035 and just saying that we aspire to a net zero. You got it? Yes. It's basically remove the date. That's all.
So that's now, if we have a second of that becomes the motion. Would somebody like to second that? Seconded by Councillor Shepherd. Councillor Goldsworthy.
Like the climate change policy, there has been considerable community input to the environment strategy. We also have an action plan attached to that. It does involve significant work from the council. Some of it tackles climate change directly. The reason why I changed the first goal ever so slightly is because I'd like to see us being more aspirational. It's a result of a couple of submissions that we received. 2035 may well be too late for many in our community, and for us to reach zero greenhouse gas emissions by then is probably not setting the standard that some in our community would like us to meet. So for that reason, I recommend the environment strategy and the minor change to the goal 1.
So Councillor Shepherd.
So this is for the amendment. I think taking the date out means that when we do have the consultant come to give us a base emissions and they will be able to assist us in if we can talk to them about as fast as we can to get to zero emissions, we're more likely to get a realistic date then, rather than just choosing 2035, which I'm not quite sure where that comes from.
Could you tell us what the cost would be to reach that target?
No. And part of it is around finding out what our current emissions are and then figuring out a plan on how to do it.
Yeah, I just wondered whether you'd worked out a cost, but you haven't. So you've just seconded. Would somebody else like to speak to the motion? That's the motion. That's the motion. That's what, when you said you wanted to speak to the amendment, I was going to say that is the motion. So do you wish to speak to the motion, Councillor Shepherd?
Oh, yes, I do. I just would like to thank the advisory committee, again, the Environment Advisory Committee again, who have worked this up with our officer, Jill Croom, who's at home at the moment with a baby, and congratulations. So the climate, we've got the goals of climate change, biodiversity, water, sustainable development and waste. And on our committee, the Environment Advisory Committee, there are experts in each of those areas that were able to speak well to this, to implementing this environment strategy. So I'm really proud of the work they've done there, and I'm really glad that the community have had an opportunity to have feedback, and they've given us lots of positive feedback that's been included. So yes, I really support the work that's happening in our environment strategy and our committees and communities.
Councillor Price?
Again, this is a strategy that's not required. However, I think that we have a huge buy-in for our community in terms of this environment strategy that is reflected by the strength of the committee that is the IEAC, the Environment Advisory Committee. We're really proud of the membership of that committee, and we feel that we get really strong advice and that they work really effectively alongside council and represent the community. Thank you to those who made submissions on the 5 themes that they related more to the implementation of the strategy, which was overwhelmingly supported, and they'll assist in the identification of projects and guiding the future environment implementation plans. I think that the strength of one of the bonuses of having a strategy like this is that we can increase our alignment and greater efficiency in responding to these issues by partnering with organisations in the area And as we constantly see, it gives us greater access to grant funding opportunities. And I think that this is really a strong point of the Indigo Shire, our work in this space, and something that we should be really proud of. And when we talk about roads, rates and rubbish, I think that our community equally comes to us wanting leadership on this issue.
Councillor Murdoch.
Yeah, I have to endorse what everybody has said, but the one thing that I do know, I've just been visiting my 6 of my 8 grandchildren down in Ballarat, and when I look at them, I think that if we don't do something to get what everybody says is almost to the stage of an emergency and do something to help our environment and to help us survive, I couldn't look my children or my grandchildren in the eye.
Would somebody else like to speak to the motion?
I have a question.
Councillor Trenery.
The action plan that was attached to it when it first went out, it's no longer there. Can I ask why that action plan's not on there? I'm happy for the mover to answer it.
I'll defer to the staff. I'd like to see it on there.
CEO?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, the action plan, there was an action plan attached to the documents that went out, and it was mainly for completeness to say, yeah, we've already been working on this up until date, and there's actions that are in progress at the moment. Some have already been, actions have been taken on various issues over the last year or two, or many years, I suspect, as well as into the future. When this went out to the public in May for comment, the resolution that was passed by council at the time was to say that the strategy itself was endorsed and put out for public comment. The action plan, which is it's a working document that staff use to implement the strategy, would also be put out just for information, say there it was. The thinking was that we wouldn't necessarily ask council to endorse the action plans because they keep changing all the time, and we may come up with different ways to implement the same strategy. So rather than having an action plan that was adopted by council that then couldn't be changed, we kept that as a working document internally that was operational, that gave effect to a strategy. And that the thinking was always going to be that the strategy itself would come back to a meeting, being this meeting, after public comment. That would be adopted, considered and possibly adopted by council as being the strategy we're going to follow, but that the staff would then have to go about then implementing that strategy. There was an action plan attached for information last meeting, 2 meetings ago, just to show what that might look like. But that could change over time as we give effect to the strategy itself. So it wasn't attached again today because there's no change to it other than it was put out for information in the first place. And what's before council today is for you to consider the strategy, and once that's considered and if adopted, we'll go away then and implement that strategy. And the action by which we do it may change depending on the best way to implement the strategy. So we're looking for that strategic endorsement from council, and we'll do the operational side later.
That's a very extensive answer, CEO. I was just wondering if there was any costs involved on that action plan. We talked about openness and transparency last time this action plan went out, and I was just wondering if there was any costs on that action plan.
No, there hasn't been a specific costing done on the specifics of that action plan. Well, there's components of it that probably are costable, but the totality of it hasn't been costed, nor of the strategy itself.
Could I just ask a question about that? I thought that the charging stations, there was a budget of 17,000. So all of the items, or I won't say all, but a lot of the items in the implementation of this strategy have got a cost to them. And if those items are going to be changed, Will there be an increase in cost or decrease in cost?
As I did say that some of the items within them are costable. There was an item in there which was also referenced in the budget that spoke about possibly purchasing electric vehicles. So there was capital provision put aside for that, which included charging stations. So that was specific, but the question whether the totality of the action plan, the totality of the strategy has been costed, no, it hasn't.
There is costings in there, and there is amounts we can come to. Just in the financial implications, it's saying here expense $1,500, and I think that the impress would be the whole lot would be costing $1,500, and it says down the bottom the strategy is supported by implementing the action plan. So I would have thought that the action plan and its costs would have been available for the sake of transparency. I know other councils have put that out to be transparent and open, and councils have knocked back part of that in the past. Wodonga did a month ago, and I would like to have thought in regards to the way we did it at the last meeting where it was attached, we put it out, and there was a lot of things in there that this council can be very proud of that's being implemented. I would have liked to have seen the costs go out with that. I'd also like to ask a question of the mover in regards to the triple bottom line and ask him if he realises or if he can explain how that works when it's working out a budget.
If you're referring to the triple bottom line that isn't referenced in this document at all, you're talking about the social impact and the environmental impact as well as the financial. So I think the environmental impact will be the most significant thing. The financial impact you cannot measure because the money that we may save from future devastation because we're doing something, it cannot be measured at this time. And the social impact is we're actually representing the people, the vast majority of the people within our Shire.
The triple bottom line is actually in the policy, and it's also in a matrix in regards to spending. So I was asking you in regards to the weighting of, say, social impact if we're going to spend money compared to environmental impact compared to our normal financial impact on the budget.
I have nothing further.
I'll just make a comment. There are questions. I'll just make a quick comment. Listen, the environmental discussions are very important, and we need to achieve a lot of things in this. But I think I do get a little bit frustrated with the fact that we're not. It feels like we're not giving all the information out all the time. There is things in that we're doing that are really, really good, and we've achieved a lot of good things even in the last 12 months. But I don't think we should hide with what it costs, because the outcomes are well worth talking about as well as the costs. And I think that if we have achieved things at a certain cost, I think people would look at it as a success.
You were the seconder. You've already spoken, Councillor. You can't speak again. Well, I was looking at Local Law 3 today, and it's fairly specific. It doesn't mention at the discretion of the chair. But if you'd like to, is it regarding something that's been raised by Councillor Trenery? Oh, okay.
It's just that the strategy itself, I agree with you that there's discussion to be had around the implementation plan. That's an interesting discussion to have, but I think the strategy itself should stand alone to be voted on by the councillors. Like I think the implementation plan is a separate appendix to that is not to be voted on.
Would you like to respond to that answer, Councillor Trenery?
I think if I did, we'd be here all night.
Talk about the expense of the policy and the implementation part. How many staff are employed here in the environmental, in the environment section, CEO?
Mr. Mayor, I think the answer to that is I think we have 3 staff in that unit. Some of them are part-time, so I think there's a total, I'd say, of about 2.2, 2.4 in that range, EFT, and 3 persons.
How does that compare with economic development?
strictly speaking, economic development, in its title, there's one person in that role. I would perhaps argue that tourism, which has more staff, is also economic development of sorts, but strictly speaking, we have one economic development officer position and roughly 2.2 equivalents in environment unit.
So that's about 3 times more in the environment area than economic development. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Of the CEO?
Yes. So how many people are in the tourism department?
Now you're stretching it now. If I go through the numbers, there's probably 3 to 4 directly in the unit centrally, as well as those that are distributed amongst the precinct, the heritage precinct and VICs and so on. So I don't hazard a guess off the top of their head on that one.
I would need to confirm, but I would suspect around 15 EFT.
And 1 in economic development. Thanks. That was the question that I asked. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Goldsworthy.
I'm happy to take it to a vote.
I take it you don't want to sum up. Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 12.3, recommendation is that Council endorses the Municipal Fire Management Plan 2019-2022. Councillor Price.
Mr Mayor, I'd actually like to move a motion to defer the Municipal Fire Management Plan review until this
Would somebody like to second that? Seconded by Councillor Shepherd.
Until this
Councillor
item
Price.
can come back for another council meeting. I think this this plan and review has been developed by the appropriate people, but we want to give it really careful consideration, and I have some more questions, Mr Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Shepherd. No. Is anybody against the motion to defer? Carried. Item 12.4, the Renewable Energy Power Purchase Agreement. The recommendation is the Council commits to participate in the tender process for the collaborative Victorian Government Power Purchase Agreement project for the purpose of renewable energy. 2, the Council confirms its commitment to procure 100% of its electricity needs, that is, unmetered street lighting, large market and small market sites under this contract. 3, the Council notes that the decision to enter into a contract will be made by a tender evaluation panel, but only where the final contract offer is assessed to cost no more than the business as usual purchase of 100% renewables over the contract term, and where the offer is considered to be favourable outcome for the participating councils. And 4, that Council delegates the authority to the Chief Executive Officer to finalise and execute the retail supply agreement contracts on behalf of Indigo Shire Council. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Shepherd. Seconder? Councillor Price. Councillor Shepherd.
I'm the member on the Golden Broken Greenhouse Alliance, a councillor member, and when this came to the alliance, it was a discussion about how costly it was for all the councils that were there to buy energy, and we decided that it would be good to go out to the market and to do a business case on whether we could buy power behind the meter and whether we could buy renewable power from behind the meter. And it really was just a small project to start with, I thought. There's now the 7 greenhouse alliances throughout Victoria involved. There are now 45 councils or so that could possibly be part of this buying group to buy renewable energy behind the meter. We have a buying group where all of the councils are represented on the buying group. This group is going to work with the MAV to do the contracting. Renewable energy, it sort of makes sense that we buy renewable energy especially as we are saying that it's got to be at least as good as business as usual cost. So we will not lose money by being involved with this power purchase agreement. I can't see any negatives at this stage to this, but I'm sure someone else will find them. I think I recommend this to our council and to our community. I think the community will be behind us, working with those 45 other councillors to buy our energy behind the meter, and it be all renewable and it not cost us any more.
Councillor Price?
I think this is another really good example of exactly what we talked about with the environment strategy, the fact that our staff and our strategy allows us to partner with the Goulburn Broken Greenhouse Alliance, with other councils in a project like this. We would not be able to undertake this project ourselves, but in collaboration with other councils, we were able to participate. And it's now getting quite a bit of momentum, and more people are signing up saying this is really well done, and I look forward to the outcome.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor O'Connor?
We've just passed 2 strategies that deal with environment and climate change. And in line with that, I think this power purchase agreement is actually just enacting the strategies that we've just agreed to, that we go as in line with our fellow councillors, our other councillors in the alliance, to join in a way of purchasing renewable energy. By doing that, it actually helps with the investment into renewable energy, so it increases the availability of renewable energy for the community as well as for local government and for business. So it's investing into that industry in a way that we also benefit from that investment at a cost that is no greater than what we would be paying if we relied solely on fossil fuels. So it's a win-win for the renewable energy industry, it's a win for us financially, and it actually enacts the very policies that we have just literally minutes ago endorsed as a council.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Goldsworthy?
Just in agreement with my fellow speakers, just to say that this is a great step forward in implementing the policies we've just passed and moving towards a carbon neutral future.
Councillor Trenery?
I have a question in regards to, in the motion, it's got business as usual. I was wondering if the mover could explain that and the amount in Indigo price modelling, please.
This model has put our figures into it, so it's in the agenda. You're able to see that a business as usual expected cost is going to be for 10 years, 640,442. That's if we were buying green power as a conventional purchase, and then for the next one down, 100% renewable, which is what we're looking at. Business as usual, coal-based grid, 588,690 is expected, and the business as usual is they're our figures if we extended it to the 10 years.
Just a question on that. What we're signing up to, is that for 10 years, 7 years or 5 years?
That's still to be negotiated, really. That group that we're sending off to negotiate with the power agreement will be looking at the best market price and the best market rates and the timing. So it could be 7 years, it could be 10 years, depending on what they offer.
If after a couple of years we didn't like this, is there an opt-out clause?
What did they say? What did Bronwyn say today about the opting out? Yeah.
Councillor, the nature of this type of agreement is that the proposal is that the alliance goes to the market with a confirmed view about volumes and load, so that there's a surety then about what the potential bidders for the tenders are bidding for. So the assumption behind all of this is that we're all in it, and that there's a central panel which will write the tenders and assess the results, and that provided that the overall results that come back are better than business as usual, then it's expected that we're all in. We've signed up, we're committed to the results of the tender, so that if individual councils later on chose to pull that up within 1 or 2 or 3 years, that wouldn't be written into the tenders, that we're committed to going with it. So once the alliance says we're in this, it accepts the tender, that it wouldn't have clauses for individual councils to pull out of that. Otherwise, the whole tender process would fall over. The potential retailers wouldn't know what they're bidding for.
Sorry, I thought you meant as a group could we pull out? Is that what you meant?
No.
Okay.
So I take it by that answer that the answer's no.
The answer is no. Once, if a tender is accepted, the expectation is that all the councils that sign up to be a part of that tender are committed to that tender, and if the tenders that come back are accepted, then we're in that buying group, and there'll be no provision for individual councils after the process has started to withdraw at a later date.
So the tender will come back to you because we've asked you to delegate the authority on our behalf. Is that right?
There'll be a requirement to sign contracts, and so what you're delegating to me is the power to sign those contracts.
So this won't be a leap of faith. You've almost got a guarantee that we wouldn't be paying extra?
No, there isn't a guarantee that we won't be paying extra. There is some element of having faith in the process but the business case that's gone out has, with fair confidence, shown that it's likely that a result will come back for the total of all the councils, that we're likely to get a result that's lower than our current costs. However, that's not guaranteed for any particular council, but certainly it's likely for all of the councils. So there is an element of faith in it. Should the tender results come back for the total alliance that are not favourable to the total alliance, then all the councils together as a group could then say, well, the tenders haven't come back as favourably we thought, and the group then may decide not to pursue any of the tender results. But that decision will be in the hands of the total alliance, not in any individual council.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Yes. Councillor. Do you want to turn on your microphone, Councillor?
Is there an issue with it coming back to council for decision, or is there some reason why you'd prefer it to stay with you having the ability to finalise and execute the supply agreement?
The decision point is now as to whether we're committing to be a part of the tender, and we're putting our decision-making power then into the total alliance to make the decision that the total tenders come back are in the best interest of all councils. There won't be a decision point after today. We're either in or we're not. And so if we decide that we're in, there won't be an opportunity to come back then and say, well, here's the result of the tender. For some, whatever reason it might be, we now no longer want to be part of it. Then it really distorts the whole process, because the alliance is going to the market with a certain volume, and the market, for the whole process to work, the market has to be able to be assured that that volume is there when they put the prices in. So there won't be an opportunity to come back for individual councils then to pull out and change their mind. So today is the last decision point for council to be a part of this.
Councillor Trinnery.
I do have a question based on something that CEO just said then. The business as usual in here is 588,000 expected. Now that's over 10 years. Our current cost is 105,000, which normally you times that by 10 would be over $1 million. Do you have absolute faith in these figures? And is this an independent body that did this modelling?
So the modelling was done by external independent consultants who are experts in this field, and we do have faith in their expertise in this, and they're far more expert than any one individual council. So the Alliance together has pooled its resources to seek the most expert advice it can in the industry to put together the modelling that sits behind these figures.
So you have faith that we could have reduced our normal fees, our normal bill by over 50%? And if so, why haven't we done that in the past?
The modelling that's in here is based on the modelling that's done by the expert group in terms of its expectation of where the market is heading in all of these areas, taking into account a whole range of factors, the complexities of the market, new facilities coming on stream, available to generate power and things like that. So it's a complex marketing model, complex model that works all these sorts of things out. It isn't about necessarily Indigo Shire's ability in the past, whether or not we've had the ability to negotiate one contract or another or reduce our power costs one way or another. This is more about the industry working together to get access to this type of modelling that looks to the future. So it's a buying power that is almost certainly a better way of securing volume that we could never secure by going out individually ourselves.
I'll just make a comment. There's enough questions being asked, I think.
Councillor Trenary.
I have absolutely no faith in this modelling at all. I looked up the company. It is all for getting away from coal power rather than having anything to do with renewable. I think locking us into up to 10 years, not just this council, the next council and the council after, we've seen that in other areas of this council and it has turned out very poorly. And there is no one here that can guarantee these figures are within cooee of what's actually going to happen, or the fact that we're even going to deliver on 100% renewable if we do enter into it. They've got the right and can give us coal-fired power at that time. And not only that, is that we talk about 100%, we've got options to go less. 57 councils in Victoria are not going 100% at this stage. We're going to be out there on a limb going 21% all in with figures we can't be 100% sure of. Over 10 years. I think it's, I think economically, and I think it's a huge risk. I understand ideology, we want to follow ideology, but at some stage the economic reality has to come into it. So I'll be voting against this motion.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Shepherd to sum up.
I hear where you're coming from. I think most of those things have been discussed and answered in this report, and I think it's an exciting opportunity for us to, as has been said, work together with nearly a majority of the Victorian councils to buy renewable energy from behind the meter. And I also see the opportunity that comes in it promoting and supporting renewable energy industry in Victoria, and that's some leadership that I think we should be proud of here in Victoria. So I commend this motion to you.
Before I put this to the vote, I'd just like to comment that when I first read this and was briefed last week, I thought it was scary. But we've had a discussion with the lead council, even though it's Darebin, which is a bit scary in itself. But I'll now put the motion. Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 13.1. The recommendation is the council receives the attached unconfirmed advisory committee minutes and endorses the officer comments. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Price, seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Is anybody against? Oh, certainly, Councillor Price.
Just to acknowledge the work of the Access Committee, there was some quite strategic thinking that went on at this meeting with regards to disability parking requirements in heritage towns and how that works. And that's something that our officers are now going to bring back to that committee. And they also moved a motion that the committee moves to progress dementia-friendly accreditation for other towns across Indigo Shire, which was something that came from our community. We've got a dementia support group in Beechworth, and there's also one starting up with our assistants in Rutherglen, and we're recognising that this is the fastest growing disability worldwide, and we're going to participate in a week of dementia awareness, whereby we will be speaking with our businesses about how they can integrate some very simple strategies to help people with dementia in their everyday activities, and that'll also be something that we'll bring to council staff. So it's really brave, really strategic stuff that this committee is tackling, and I thank them for that work.
Is anybody, Councillor Shepherd?
Also, the Indigo Economic Development and Tourism Advisory Committee had 3 things that they brought to council, and they've all been actioned. So I'd just like to commend that group for the work that they're doing at the moment too. One of them is to assist, so Nerida Kerr, who is involved in dairy and water issues, and so there'll be some work on a report to council around that. There's also the recommendation that we increase the festival events grant to $30,000 from $26,000, and that was accepted in the budget, and also that we create a new grant stream of $15,000 for community events that do not align with the strategic direction of the festival and events grant. So the problem we were having was there were groups of people that weren't getting any money who were starting off small events that weren't necessarily tourism things, but were absolutely community events, and that's been supported as well. So good job happening there.
Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Just before we go to item 14.1, I'm going to vacate the chair.
We have to physically do this, do we? Yes, I know. Whoops, Daisy. Thank you.
Mrs. Deputy Mayor, I'd like to move an amendment to the motion that I originally put out. I'm happy to read that.
Just vacated the chair. If you're going to speak to your motion, I'll be back in the chair. I vacated the chair to move a motion, and then you want to discuss other business? I don't think so, Councillor.
You vacated the chair, and I've just moved an amendment to a motion.
Oh, well, in that case, I'll return to the chair. Before we discuss any other business, I intend to vacate the chair to under item 51A, page 23 of Local Law 3, to foreshadow a motion.
Yeah, that's fine. You've just vacated the chair, but I'm telling you that I'm moving an amendment to a motion.
I don't know what game you think you're playing, Councillor, but it's just silly.
Point of order,
I vacated
Mr.
the
Mayor.
chair to move a motion, and then he wants to speak to the chair.
You are no longer the chair when you vacate the chair. He's therefore speaking to the chair, who is Councillor Murdoch, once you've vacated the chair. And point of order, this motion,
If you're going to give a point of order, Councillor, under what section and in what
under
regard?
the one that refers to the motions, and I haven't got it in front of me. But
Well,
let me
Local
say,
Law 3,
just to be clear, Councillor Goldsworthy has item 14.1, a motion's been put up, no decision's been made about that motion, and he was asking to make an amendment to the chair of that motion. You're no longer the chair once you vacated the chair. So I'm not sure what your problem is with Councillor Goldsworthy asking to amend the motion that is about to be discussed with someone else in the chair. I don't understand what your
Well,
problem
I'm back in the chair, so we'll now deal with item 14.1, if that's what you wish.
Yes.
But I've foreshadowed that I will be moving a motion after this matter has been dealt with.
Sure, but let's deal with this one first.
If that's what you'd prefer, sure. What's the amendment, councillor?
Okay. So the amendment to the motion, the notice of motion that I submitted, is that the Indigo Shire Council declares a climate emergency. And in response, 1, directs the CEO to develop a notice of motion declaring a climate emergency for presentation at the next MAV and RCV State Council meetings. Prepares an advocacy plan to encourage the state and federal governments to do more to combat the effects of climate change. Develop a climate change policy action plan in consultation with the Indigo Shire Environmental Advisory Committee and the community that will, at a minimum, examine the merits and efficacy of convening a series of public meetings to address and educate our community on the threat from climate change and develop a suite of ideas that they can undertake to mitigate and prepare for the changing environment. Selling the council-owned Buller Gas operation to fund the Environment and Sustainability Strategy Action Plan and the Climate Change Action Plan. Apply to the Essential Services Commission for a rate cap variation to fund specific actions within the Environment and Sustainability Action Plan. Purchase low productivity cleared land within the Indigo Shire to plant it out with trees to capture carbon or encourage other organisations and landowners to do the same. 3, request the Municipal Emergency Management Planning Committee to critically examine the likely emergency management effects of climate change in the Indigo Shire and report back to Council on how best Council and the community can prepare and plan in the long term to mitigate the risks and adapt to the increased likelihood of extreme events. And 3, notes that there will be a global day of action on the 20th of September 2019 and requests that the CEO use Council's communication resources to help publicise this event. That's the motion.
Would somebody like to second the motion? Councillor O'Connor. Councillor Goldsworthy.
In addition to my explanatory notes, which I stand by, I'll further say and quote from a number of sources. The first will be the ABC News report from a week ago. The head of the world's biggest mining company has conceded that climate change is an existential risk to the planet. BHP Chief Executive Andrew Mackenzie warns that the world's dependence on fossil fuels is undeniable and presents the biggest threat since World War II. In a message to global resource industry and climate deniers, Mr Mackenzie said BHP would reduce its own emissions over the next 5 years and tackle pollution caused when customers use its products. The Emergency Management Act 2013, Section 3, defines an emergency as an actual or imminent occurrence of an event which in any way endangers or threatens to endanger the safety or health of any person in Victoria, or which destroys or damages or threatens to destroy or damage any property in Victoria, or endangers or threatens to endanger the environment or an element of the environment in Victoria. Climate change has already impacted our environment. It's actual and it's imminent. These changes are affecting the safety and health of our communities. They're damaging property and will threaten life. The flooding event in mid-December is a perfect example. It was declared by the Bureau of Meteorology as a 1 in 200 year event, with a microburst that flooded the Hume Highway as a 1 in 2,000 year event. On the 22nd of July, ABC News online published an article titled "Drought and Climate Change are Driving High Water Prices in the Murray-Darling Basin." They referred to a table from the Murray-Darling Basin Authority showing water flows this century so far for the last 19 years are about 40% below the average of the 20th century for the Murray River. That's the same Murray River that provides water to Tangambalanga, Barnawatha, Chiltern, Rutherglen and Waganya. While there's no threat at the moment of the water supply for our towns, I'm tipping only a couple of years ago that the towns on the Darling River system and throughout New South Wales and Queensland were thinking the same thing. Even with a secure supply, at the moment the price of water is increasing with decreasing availability, and that affects our farmers, our wineries and our ratepayers. There is every likelihood In 6 months' time, we'll be going through what Europe is experiencing now: record-setting temperatures, heat waves, and ongoing threat of bushfires. All of us here are parents, and some are grandparents. If you have a new family member born within the last couple of years, know that at the end of this century, when they are 80 years old, if the world continues unabated in polluting the atmosphere, they'll be living in a world that is 3 to 4 degrees warmer and all the chaos that entails. When they call 000, there won't be enough ambulances, fire brigade or police to go around. This motion is about recognising the effects of climate change and doing something about it at a local, state and federal level. We are but one cog in the wheel, but we can play a role in moving the wheel just a little bit. And hopefully this will inspire the next cog and the next cog. And when the wheel starts to turn, when the world leaders start to understand climate change, we'll all work to save the planet we live on. This is a climate emergency and we need to support our community by supporting this motion.
Okay, Councillor O'Connor.
I reserve my right.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Okay, Councillor Shepherd.
I support this motion. I especially like the change that you made around us looking at those different areas rather than saying that we need to sell Buller gas, that we need all those different lists of things. I like the fact that we're going to explore that. I think that gives us more options. I also like the addition of the Environment Committee, who also, as I've spoken earlier, are very aware of all of the concerns around climate change and climate emergency. So I don't know that there's a lot more I can add to what you've said, as a matter of fact, other than the fact that my children, most of them are in some way involved in trying to mitigate climate change, and I feel their presence around this and feel that I need to support it, if not for me, for them and for their future children.
Councillor Murdoch.
I'd like to reiterate that. I'm a proud grandmother, as I said before, of 8 children. I want them and their children and the children after them to be able to say that we've tried to do something, or we have done something that has mitigated climate change and made the world a better place for them to live into the future, because it's not about us, it's about them.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion?
Got a question, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Trenery.
It's been fairly constant, but with all the things that you're expecting to be done on this, what's the cost? You spent a lot of time and effort on a big speech and talking to the Board of Mail and things, but what's the cost to the ratepayers?
The real cost is if we do nothing.
So I'll take that you don't know what the cost is going to be. I'll make a comment from there, as pointless as it may be. I think what we should remember is we had a sensible conversation around CFCs as a community, we got rid of them. And we had a sensible conversation around lead fuel as a community, we got rid of them. This is not a sensible way of going about things. This does not bring people on board that are not already on board. And that's what we need to do to achieve things.
Okay, Councillor Price.
A climate change emergency, for me, the greatest example that I think that we can give is the fact that my generation is now taking into account in their family planning whether they will have children and what the world will be like for them as they age. That's not a consideration that past generations have had to make. And I think that absolutely makes it a climate emergency for me. I think that it's a heavy burden that people of my generation have on them in choosing to have children, because we are at this point where we don't know what world we are setting up for our children and our grandchildren. And so I think it's really important that us as a council, as leaders and leaders right across the world, establish that this is a climate emergency and take action from that point.
Just a couple of questions. You've declared a climate change. Is that for Indigo Shire, or is it for Victoria, Australia, or the world?
Climate change occurs over what they traditionally call a 30-year period, and it's affecting the world. It's not just an isolated event in one area, it's affecting the world.
I noticed that you've asked the CEO to report back to council, and you've got a few things. One is to sell the council-owned Buller gas. Why have you singled that out?
I've asked the CEO to examine the prospect of doing that. That's because it's a transition fuel. If we want to move to a fully carbon neutral environment, one, we could sell that, and two, we could, with the funds obtained from that, fund the programs that need to be funded in order to reach a carbon neutral status.
So you'd be concerned that Indigo Shire is involved in the distribution of fossil fuel?
As I've said, it's a transition fuel, and if we can get a good price for it at the moment and use that money to fund some transition programs, then that's a positive.
If it's distributing, fossil fuel, wouldn't it help the planet a lot more if we just closed it down rather than selling it to somebody else who could make a profit from it? Wouldn't it be better to close it down? Why do you want to become complicit and making profit from that? I thought you'd want it closed down.
I fully recognise that Buller Gas has been a profitable operation for the council. We are in a changing environment. We are transitioning ourselves, and we need to fund this program. This is a good opportunity to use the money from the sale of that, if it was so determined that it was the correct thing to do, to fund that carbon neutral aspiration.
So it's an aspiration. Do you know how much profit it made last financial year, Buller Gas?
It would be about equivalent to a 3 to 40% rate increase, so roughly over $300,000.
You're about halfway there, councillor, $695,609, which is about a 7% rate increase. You also want the CEO to report back in regard to applying to the Essential Services Commission for a rate cap variation to fund the Environment and Sustainability Strategy Action Plan, which we don't have an action plan, is that right?
So what I'm asking the CEO to do is to actually look as to whether it's financially viable to do that, and that'll be in consultation with our committees and with the community to see whether it's worth doing. And they will be the ones that help us make that decision.
So you would be looking at him to see how much of a rate increase we could get above the rate cap. So if it was 3%, we're up to a 10% rate increase for every ratepayer in Indigo Shire. Dot point 3, you talk about purchasing cleared land.
Sorry, was that a question? If I believe it's going up to 10%? No, I don't. I'm asking the CEO to have a look at the financial implications of doing those things.
10%. Do you then want the CEO to look at purchasing land within Indigo Shire to plant out with trees, to capture carbon, and encouraging other organisations and landowners to do the same? So for the CEO to look at purchasing low productivity cleared land, how much do you want? Do you want 2,000 acres, 50 acres? You've got to have a figure in mind. And would that be paid for by another rate increase? Has it been costed?
You've had the notice of motion to read over for a week now, and I thought it would be
Not the amended one,
fairly clear that it's the same basic details in it. It would be fairly clear that I'm asking the CEO to examine the prospect. I'm not saying to do it. I'm saying to examine it and bring it back to council. It will be open for full debate and discussion amongst the community and councillors as to whether it's worth doing. And if it saves the planet, maybe it is worth doing.
I'm sure actions that are taken in Indigo Shire could save the planet, councillor. So CEO, how much land would you look at? Would you be looking at 50 acres or 5,000 acres? You've been asked to report back to council. So how much land would you be looking at?
So, sorry, Mr Chair, I don't know what the question or the answer is to that. I don't quite follow.
So you'd be just looking at a block of land somewhere to plant trees on?
Oh, at the moment there's no detail in this notice of motion as to what that would be. So I don't know the answer to that question.
It's very broad. Has any of this been to the Finance Committee? Councillor Trini, you're on that. Has any of that gone to the Finance Committee to be discussed or even spoken about?
No.
Not at all.
No, not at all. We haven't had a Finance Committee meeting for a while, so none of it's been discussed.
I notice in your notes attached to your notice of motion, you talk about the ABC reported that the City of Sydney was the 26th Australian local government to declare a climate emergency. You don't speak about the roughly 474 councils that haven't. And what percentage would that be?
The cogs are still moving. They'll get there.
Yeah. You also talk about the 800 local, state and federal governments worldwide. You don't speak about what percentage would that be of councils around the world? 0.00000? 1%? Do you know, or do you wish to answer?
You're asking me a
What
question?
percentage of councils? Yeah.
As I said, the cogs are turning. We'll get there.
Your expertise in declaring a climate emergency seems to be that you watched the Sir David Attenborough, is that the Lost Planet documentary? That's what you're basing your expertise on, or what is your expertise regarding climate emergency?
My expertise is based on the fact I've got 2 ears, 2 eyes and 1 mouth.
You wish us to advocate to the federal government regarding this. Could you tell me whether you're happy with the targets set by the federal government, and are they meeting those targets which were mentioned at the Paris Climate Accord?
It depends who you listen to. The federal government will tell you they're meeting them, but others will tell you that the figures are going up the whole time in relation to carbon output.
Are you referring to the Greens?
And others.
Could you tell us what steps the federal government are taking to address climate change and how much money they're spending?
Why don't you ask your federal member and see how you go with that?
So you don't know. What about the state government?
You can always do more, Bernie.
I think everybody's spoken to the motion.
I reserved my right.
Oh,
would like
yes,
to now.
Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Mayor. So this week, 15,963 scientists released a letter saying that the impact of the ongoing climate emergency is now leading to catastrophic outcomes. These are people who know far more about it than I would claim to. Perhaps more others here know more than they do, but I'm not going to claim that. We are here as elected representatives, the people of our communities, and the largest of the communities in our Shire is 3,000 people. So these are small rural communities. These people are getting on with acting in the face of gross inaction on climate change from our federal and state governments. We have people who are investing in renewable energy and running community energy projects. We have people who sew boomerang bags in their volunteer time. We have people that stand up against the water mining industry and the water bottling industry. We have farmers who are implementing sustainable farming in the face of massive threats. We have towns just up the road from us in the nearby states who are likely to be running out of water by the end of next week. We are facing a climate emergency. We as a local government do have a responsibility to do all we can to take care of the well-being of our community. And I think that if we, in the face of all of the advice that is coming from around the world, from scientists with immense knowledge, from the independent panel on climate change, the Commission on Climate Change, and yes, from people like David Attenborough, who are spokespeople, if we don't listen to all of them, then I think we are abrogating our responsibilities in the same way as if we were being warned on a health pandemic or a disease or any other thing that would be a threat to our community. If we chose as a local government to close our eyes and ears and say we don't want to listen to the science, as we did have to do, for example, with Lake Samble when there was a threat to that lake, the dam wall breaking. It cost $3 million. If we hadn't have done that in the face of the advice that this could lead to a loss of life in our community, we would have been absolutely abrogating our responsibility. So in the face of much stronger advice that's coming globally, nationally, from all corners of the planet and from all corners of this country, and from our own advisors, for us not to take notice of that, I think, would be gravely, gravely irresponsible. This is probably the most important thing any of us will do. Certainly I feel that I will be doing in my term as a councillor. I have a responsibility to support you, to support my children, and to do everything I can to encourage this council to take the action it must take, irrespective of the cost, to keep our communities safe in the face of a looming disastrous impact that we are now looking at into the future.
Councillor Goldsworthy.
You don't have to be an expert to know that the climate's changing. You don't have to be an expert to know that an emergency is occurring before our very eyes. We owe it to our families, to the community and to our future to do something now and not sit on our hands. Just like other debates we've had, those that are against this will be on the wrong side of history in years to come.
A small cheer squad in the gallery for Councillor Goldsworthy and O'Connor. Excuse me. I now put the motion. Is anybody against the motion? Carried.
Division.
Carried. Division.
Division.
All those for the motion? Councillor O'Connor, Price, Murdoch, Goldsworthy, Shepherd. Those against? Councillor Trenery and Gaffney.
I used to play this game when I was a kid. Thank you. Which is mine and which is... That's mine. Rightio. Okay. What are we doing now?
Under item 52A on page 23 of Local Law 3, I wish to foreshadow a motion after the current motion.
Oh, sorry.
After the cut, you just cut me off.
Oh, sorry. I like pushing buttons.
The motion is that Council requests the Federal Minister for the Environment to appear before Council to discuss the climate and climate emergency. 2, request the Federal Member for Indi to appear before Council to discuss the climate and climate emergency and her plan to address climate change. Request the State Member for Benambra to appear before Council to discuss the climate and climate emergency. Request the CEO of the CSIRO to appear before Council to discuss the climate and climate emergency, including newly announced proposals to halve greenhouse gas emissions in Australia. The Council requests the Chief Scientist to appear before Council to discuss climate and the climate emergency. We all know and are concerned about climate change. We believe that it is real and we accept it. However, we are a very small rural council with only about 13,000 enrolled voters, not all of whom vote. We should not be making decisions for the world or for Australia or Victoria. We are here to make local decisions for our local community. We should not be following any political party. The Greens made a decision at their national conference, and the very next day, Councillor Goldsworthy sends us a notice of motion which is exactly the same to that decision by the Greens. We need to hear from experts in this area and the decision makers in this area. It's interesting that the Greens endorsed councillor seconded this motion. Call for a seconder.
A seconder?
Yeah, I was going to say probably before we debate that we probably should have a seconder. I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you. Right, yes.
Can I ask some, oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, we've got.
I think it's really important. We are Indigo Shire councillors. We make decisions for Indigo Shire and what's best for our community. This motion has got up. We're expecting a report. At the very least, your rates will increase by 10%. Have no doubt about that. And will it make any difference? The population of Indigo Shire and the area would probably, on the world scale, be 0.000. I could talk for half an hour the number of zeros that would involve Indigo Shire compared to the world. This is a worldwide crisis. There are the United Nations. I'm not sure whether Councillor Goldsworthy wants to go there and speak to them and say, I'm Councillor Goldsworthy from Indigo Shire. I agree that climate change is here and it's real. It's a world crisis. Other nations across the world could not care less. Australia is spending billions of dollars to address it. I just think we're a very small rural shire. Great to be symbolic, but to make a real difference, I don't think so.
Thank you for no comments, thank you. Oh, sorry, Diane.
I might
Councillor,
reserve
a
my right,
seconder?
I think.
I agree with the bit that I'd like our federal member and our state member to come perhaps and talk to us about what their actions are around climate change. But the others, it's probably going to be too difficult to get them here. But those two, I think, are responsible members that we've voted in, and we should be hearing from them too around what their ideas around climate change and climate emergency. So I agree with that bit. Oh, yes, I'm happy to move an amendment to the motion that, if I can get a seconder, that we ask our state and federal member to address us in a briefing around their actions around climate change.
Are we seconded for that?
I'll second that.
Councillor
No,
O'Connor?
well, I thought, Madam, that you'd ask whether the mover and seconder would agree to that amendment.
Okay, yes. you're
All
right.
I'm saying is, I'm not saying they're coming, but I'd like to ask them to come, and I'll join the debate about the amendment, but
So you're quite in favour of them coming, you're not?
Well, it matters not what I say then, does it, in regards to the amendment? But it just, listen, we're going to send a letter to the federal government. Why not send a letter to these people and ask them to come along? We hear the quote of all scientists say, all the scientists tell us this. Let's get one here and talk to us about it.
I just would have thought we would have debated the amendment first. We'd go from there. So I would
Right.
say that the mover of the amendment would speak and the seconder, and we go round.
Doesn't the move, sorry,
Yeah,
point of
but
order,
it's
doesn't the mover have to accept the amendment though? Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Right, okay. So we move with the first person? Yeah. Yes, okay. Diane,
Can I just hold that amendment? I'm interested in hearing your debate.
Just regarding the amendment, I don't know why you would not want to hear from the Minister for the Environment to find out what the Australian government's doing. Why wouldn't you want to hear?
It's
And
not
having
the
the opportunity to put your point of view to her. She's only just across the creek, not far away. And why you wouldn't want to hear
I'm
disturbs
willing
me.
to listen to your debate around it then. Go.
Well, I think it's important that we get the experts here, not only the experts, the decision makers. And the decision makers is the federal and state government, particularly the federal government. The Minister for the Environment is the minister responsible for climate. And I just think all we can do is invite them, ask them to come. I don't know why they wouldn't come. And it might be, once I've heard from them, that I would support Councillor Goldsworthy's motion. I think it's important to get the experts here. I haven't heard from it. I hear from Richard D. Natali, and I hear what he says, and declaring a climate emergency last Saturday week, and then we get this motion on the Sunday. I know that it might be said that that's a coincidence. My training says that I don't believe in coincidences, and I just thought it strange, but I'd like to hear from the experts. And I'm not a climate change denier. I know it's real, but I don't know whether this is the way to go about doing it. That's why all I'm asking is that Council invite these people to appear before us.
Can I ask a question of
Councillor O'Connor.
the mover? Councillor Gaffney, Mayor Gaffney, do you
Point of
really
order, we
expect-
moving the amendment, we debating the amendment or the motion?
Can I ask a question at any point in time?
Well, if you're moving the mover of the amendment,
Chair, can I ask a question at any point in time of the mover?
Pardon?
Am I permitted to ask a question at any point in time of the mover? I believe so. Is that correct?
The movers, Councillor Shepherd.
Sorry, I'm just checking with, no,
But Councillor Shepherd.
Councillor Shepherd just said she was holding the amendment. To hear you. So I'm now asking you some questions.
Thank you.
I'm confused.
We're all confused.
confused.
Let's
Okay.
sit down. Yes. Excuse me, sir, but we're wanting to get some clarity here.
So can I
I
ask,
thought I was talking to the amendment then.
Right.
can I ask the question of your motion, given that we don't have an amendment on the table at the moment?
The CEO's got his hands ready.
I guess, just to try and unravel this, I just want to clarify whether an amended motion has been put. I think you're saying you're withdrawing it for now. You want to hear the original debate. So even though you put an amendment and it was seconded, you're now withdrawing that to retreat back to the original motion. Is that where you're at? So if we unwind 2 or 3 minutes and we're back to the original motion, which is moved by Councillor Gaffney and seconded by Councillor Trenier, I think, and the questions have been put to the mover.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so,
Councillor O'Connor.
Councillor Gaffney, do you honestly expect that the senior CEO of the CSIRO and the Chief Scientist of Australia will come and address Indigo Shire Council, or is this just a motion to make fun of the seriousness of the issue of climate emergency?
Well, so climate change is real. You invite the CEO or you invite the chief scientist. If they can't come, they usually send a representative. You've been in council long enough to know that's the general process.
I've been in council long
You're
enough
right
to know that you never
You asked me a
get...
question, but you won't let me answer
You
it.
just did.
No, I hadn't finished. This council in the past has resolved to write to the Premier. The Premier is not always the person who responds to council, but that's the person you often write to, or the Minister.
So should we
The
also
CEO
invite the Prime Minister?
You're just being silly, Councillor.
I think you're being silly, frankly.
The Minister for the Environment, you don't want to hear from her?
Yeah,
I
I'm
do
quite
too.
happy to. You
Well,
asked
that's
the
what's
Chief
in
Scientist
the
of
motions.
Australia,
The Chief Scientist, yes.
and you think I'm being silly when I say the Prime Minister. What's the difference?
Madam
both.
Deputy Mayor, are we asking questions or are we debating?
Okay, then my
we are
next
starting
question,
to
my
debate.
next
Just a
question is,
thank you.
do you think it's acceptable for a child to throw rubbish out the back of a car window? Yes or no? That's a question.
Out the back window?
Do you think it's acceptable for people to litter?
No, I don't.
Okay, but what difference does it make if one kid throws rubbish out of a car window? It's only such a 0.000. I could be here all day saying the noughts in terms of the impact on the environment. That's the argument you're putting, that what we do at Indigo Shire is of so little significance in the face of climate change that it makes no difference. But the fact is
Point of
that
order.
every
This is
piece
on
of
relevance.
action,
We're talking about
Every-
inviting
I'm-
people, we're not debating climate change.
every action that we take in this Shire, the argument that the Mayor put up was that what we did in Indigo Shire made no difference. I'm making the point that we have a responsibility at a local government level and as individuals, just like in any argument about climate change, and to say that what we do will make no difference is as nonsensical as saying that one person littering makes no difference. It all makes a difference, and we have a responsibility in that, so I dispute your argument.
What's the question? That wasn't a question,
It
Councillor,
was
that was a
the
statement.
question was, does it make any difference? And my question to you is, really, well, what does any difference ever get made when people do things at a small scale? In the same way as we have defended against water mining on a small scale, because it makes a difference to do that.
No question.
No question and no. Councillor Shepherd.
Could I just, a question, to what end do you want to invite them? Like for what? I can see, so far I can see the use of the climate, the Environment Minister and our local members, because we can speak to them about what their actions are. I'm just interested in what you would want the letter to, what the purport of the letter, like what are you asking, why are you asking them here? To interrogate them or to hear their advice?
Certainly not to interrogate them. I don't interrogate anybody. But there are questions that I would like to ask them, and I would like to hear what their plan is to address climate change, which is real and something needs to be done about it. I know they're doing some things, but I'd like to hear what they are doing, particularly the Minister. And the CSIRO, the CEO made a statement very recently, the last couple of days, about a plan that they have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by half. I'd like to hear what they've got to say. And that would make a real difference. It would make a real difference. That's what I'd like to hear. And I'm sure they would send somebody to address that. And the letter would say, that's what we would like to hear from them. I think it's important.
Thank you, Councillor Gaffney. Now, anybody else? Yes, thank you.
Would you consider expanding that so it's a public forum so that many people could hear from these experts?
To have a public forum and for people to come and throw rocks at them, I'm not sure whether they'd come. In the first instance, I'd like to invite them to come to council. In fact, it'd be really good if that was live streamed.
Thank you. Anyone else? The motion is? Yeah, sorry, Councillor Goldberg. Yes, thank you.
I do have concerns as to whether you're being disingenuous with your attempts to get these particular people involved. If you are genuine in relation to informing the community, then I think it should be something we do more publicly than having to invite them here. Yeah, so I'm supportive, particularly of having our local members come in and speak to us. If there are experts that can shed further light on it and what we should be doing in the development of an action plan, then good and well. But I also believe to show the genuineness, we should actually do it at a public level and not just in chambers.
Anybody else? Yes, sorry, Councillor Trenery. Yes. Pardon? You'll speak?
I too question whether you are being genuine in wanting to, needing to hear this advice on an Indigo Shire level. I think that a quick Google search will give you all the expert advice that you need. Authorities like CSIRO have put out statements that cover exactly what we're after. I think the chief scientist is probably pretty busy, and I think similarly they'll have statements that will cover exactly what we need as a council. I think you'll find that they will encourage people as individuals to take action on climate change. I think they'll encourage community groups to take action on climate change, and they'll absolutely encourage us as a council, as elected representatives of a community, to take action on climate change. All of these things I think I already know. But I am happy to get them here to say, what are you doing and what more could you be doing and how can we support you? But again, I think that these bodies have made really clear statements in regard to climate change and climate emergency.
Thank you. Councillor Trenry.
CSRIO, I was lucky enough when I was mayor to be involved in a debate with the U3A, organised them to come up, as well as other scientists on opposing sides to nuclear power, and it was probably the most interesting thing I've ever listened to. It was amazing, the information you got, and just the backwards and forwards. I learnt so much about it, pros and cons, and I think, to say that we're disingenuous, I honestly would like to see these people here and talk to them at some stage and invite whoever we got to invite to ask these questions. I think it's very easy, and it's to say, the scientists say. Let's get a scientist down here and talk about it and put that information in front of us and for us to relay it. I think we should be talking to our elected members and talking to them about it. We have, as a council, whether I agree with it or not, declared an emergency. So why would we not get people in to talk about that? I don't understand why we'd even think about not talking about it. We're going to send a letter to the federal government, part of that. If we're going to be disingenuous, I'm sure that's going to be well and truly read by the one or two people that are going to be looking at it. Let's get people here that are both should be accountable and also give us information. I think regardless of what you think the motivation of the motion is, I think it's the end result is fantastic.
I'd like to foreshadow a motion.
So on that we go. Back to the speaker to move the motion. Could you summarise, please, Mr. Speaker? Yeah. Yeah. Renewals.
Well, we're
So
just
I have the
about
ability to give the general.
sum up.
That's
Am
right.
I allowed to? And you're asking for.
I'm just
the new
foreshadowing
business?
that if this
foreshadowing.
motion
And
is
then-
lost, that there'll be another motion that supports getting our local members to come and speak with us. And if necessary, we examine the possibility of getting other experts to come and speak to us after that.
Right. Councillor Gaffney.
Can I
you
sum
could
up
sum
now,
up, please.
Madam
Yes,
Mayor?
thank you.
Yeah. It's interesting that I'm told that I'm disingenuous. Why you would say that, I don't know. All I want to do is hear from the scientists. I want to hear from the experts. They don't have to be the chief scientist, but that's who you invite. And I want to hear from the decision makers, not just Indigo Shire councillors who are saying, this is an emergency, what we're going to sell Buller gas and all of that. I want to hear from the decision makers who make major decisions, who might fund part of this. I don't know, but why you wouldn't want to speak to the decision makers, why you wouldn't want to hear from the experts, baffles me. It just baffles me. And it'd be interesting that Councillor Goldsworthy now wants to move to foreshadow that another motion about who he wants here and cut out who he doesn't want there. Yeah, I just view it with suspicion.
Right. Well, I'll put the motion. All those in... Could you read it out again, please? Read it out so that the audience can hear it.
No, I've changed it from what I had written here. Request the Federal Minister for the Environment. Request the Federal Member for Indi. Request the Federal Minister for the Environment. Request the Federal Member for Indi to appear before Council to discuss climate change and her plan to address climate change. Request the State Member for Benambra. Request the CEO of the CSIRO to appear before Council to discuss the climate, including newly announced proposals to halve greenhouse gas emissions in Australia. And request the Chief Scientist to appear before Council to discuss climate change, the climate and climate change.
Right, I'm going to put the motion.
There should be 5.
All those in favour? Against?
Division.
I call a division. All those in favour? Councillor Trennery and Councillor Gaffney. Those against? Councillor Shepherd, Councillor Goldsworthy, Councillor O'Connor and Councillor Price and Councillor Murdoch.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you.
I have a foreshadowed motion.
Yes,
Yes.
we have a foreshadowed motion.
So I'd like to move a motion that we invite our local, state and federal representatives and the Minister for the Environment to come and speak to Council. And we would like to do that in a public forum. If at a later date we determine we'd like to hear from further experts, then we make that invitation available. And no, I haven't got a copy of that. I'm hoping somebody wrote it down.
Do you have a live stream so we can replay those words?
Would somebody like to second that motion? Seconded by Councillor O'Connor. Councillor Goldsworthy.
I think the issue raised around getting our local representatives in to speak to what they're doing at a state and federal level in relation to climate change is a good idea. So congratulations, Mayor Gaffney, on that idea. I think it is important that we involve the community in this because they're as much a part of this debate as any of us. They've got a very real vested interest in this and ensuring that it's done properly. And I believe that if in the future we determine that we should hear further from experts around it and how we can plan to mitigate our carbon emissions and greenhouse gases, then we should get those experts in. But I'd like it done in a controlled and an informed way, not one that is dropped on us at the last minute.
Councillor O'Connor.
I also commend the spirit of your motion that we get people who are decision makers and influential to come to council, but I also think we need to be realistic about who we invite. I mean, I'd like David Attenborough to come, but he probably couldn't make it. So I think asking our federal members with a view to also getting advice from experts. We do already have scientific experts that advise us on our Environment Advisory Committee, but to get those who are perhaps in broader roles here as well is absolutely a great idea. So I support and to allow the community and the public, who after all are going to be wearing the impacts of climate change in their everyday lives, to also have access to that information and to be able to question their elected representatives about what they're doing regarding climate change, I think is a very worthy thing to do. So thank you for your suggestion, but I think Councillor Goldsworthy's amendment is more realistic.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Price.
Yeah, I certainly look forward to those representatives coming and speaking to both councillors and community. I think that's a really important mix that councillors are seeking their input into what actions they're taking at a federal and state level. But I think it's really also important that our community comes along and says exactly the expectations that they have of their federal, state and local government representatives, and also to be able to demonstrate the action that they're taking within our communities, so that us as councillors can have a really good understanding of the way our community feels about this issue and exactly the stance that we should be taking going forward.
Councillor Murdoch.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's great that we can have an opportunity to have people here who can give us some expert advice and give the whole community or communities that we live in a chance to actually hear from the people that are expounding these climate change problems. And yes, I think it's a great idea to have them up here. Thank you for suggesting it.
Yeah, the motion is not to have the experts here, Councillor Murdoch. Is Councillor Goldsworthy's motion is not to have them. But thank you.
Just to have the people who...
Councillor Trennery.
You know, I don't understand why people who say, let's have scientists here, let's talk to scientists, given the opportunity to ask real questions from scientists, we decide not to have them. It's, you know, this has turned into a political debate, nothing more, nothing less, and I'm really disappointed.
Ask a question? Sorry, my understanding was that Councillor Goldsworthy said that we would get expert advice from scientists. So I'm not sure why both of you are saying he didn't ask for that.
No, he wants
Sorry, can you correct
just the
me?
local members he wants here.
Councillor Goldsworthy, can I get just a clarification from you? I'm sure you said the words, and they'll be on the live stream,
Yeah, I did.
to get advice from expert scientists. The point was, do we get the chief scientist of Australia, or do we ask other scientists who are probably more available to us?
You're quite right.
We had an opportunity to ask the right scientists to come here. There was, you know, why change the motion other than for political reasons?
Just a comment, I'm not surprised that you wouldn't want independent experts to come and talk to us. I'm not surprised. I am a bit surprised that you don't want the Minister for the Environment, who's a decision maker on exactly climate emergency or climate change. You don't want to hear. You only want the locals. Is that right? You just want the two locals?
No, I did say the Minister for the Environment as well.
Well, that's
scientists.
That's the trouble when it's not written. Yeah, which scientist? Someone from the Environment Advisory Committee?
Yeah, I had the same problem when you put up your motion. I didn't know what you're asking for either.
Well, that might be why you voted against it. You didn't understand.
Can I move that the motion be put?
So the motion is we're going to... Yeah, could you tell me what the motion is, Councillor? Because now I'm confused. I know you voted against mine, not knowing what it was, but yeah, I'd like to know.
Yeah, all we'd like is transparency, isn't it? Could I ask that... so that the Indigo Shire Council request the Minister for the Federal Minister for the Environment, the local members and for Indi and State Member for Benambra to appear before Council to discuss climate change in a public forum. Then if at a later date, if we decided, make possible to hear from scientists, from experts, sorry. There you go, that's a quick transcript from the Secretariat.
I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Division. All those in favour? Councillor Price, Goldsworthy, Murdoch, Price, O'Connor. Against? Trennery, Gaffney.
Thanks, sorry, Mayor. Just in relation to a meeting with Malcolm Campbell at Lake Moodamere, would you be able to just expand a little bit on that for us? Thank you.
He contacted us and he's a past president of the Irrigators Association or similar?
Sandy Creek Irrigation Committee.
The Sandy Creek Irrigation Committee. And a meeting was arranged so that he showed us the way the irrigation worked, how water filled into Lake Mudamere. So it was really a site inspection so that we could get clarity about where things were. We've also had a meeting with Parks Victoria regarding Lake Mudamere, and we've arranged a meeting, the CEO has arranged a meeting with Goulburn Murray Water.
So just to further to that, will the community be informed of any changes or developments around Lake Mudamere due to irrigation?
I would say once we're informed, if there is to be some changes, yes.
Thank you.
Registers for information. Item 18, the recommendation is that this ordinary meeting of council move into confidential session in accordance with section 89(2)A of the Local Government Act. Yes, I'll just jump back to, is there any general business?
Can I just mention one thing? Councillor Gaffney was away and I had represented him at a meeting at the biodiesel factory, I suppose, at the best of words, in Barnawatha, which is it's burning or clean burning or biodiesel products produces 86% and fewer life cycle greenhouse gases than petroleum diesel creates, 47% less particulate matter and reduces hydrocarbon emissions by 67%. That is in Barnawatha, just down the road from where I live, just up the road from where Councillor Price lives. It's reopening of a factory that's been closed down for, probably 10 years. And the other side of that is, I think there's something like 12 people employed there in the small town of Barnawatha. So I think that's a little bit of a plus for all of us.
Do we have any other general business? Item 18, the recommendation is that this ordinary meeting of council move in a confidential session in accordance with section 89(2)A of the Local Government Act 1989. The purpose of moving into confidential is that council will be discussing contractual issues. Would somebody like to move that? Moved by Councillor Murdoch, seconded by Councillor Shepherd. Is anybody against? Carried. Would somebody like to move that council move out of confidential? Moved by councillor Murdoch, seconded by councillor Goldsworthy. Is anybody against? Carried. I now close the meeting. The next meeting will be on Tuesday, the 27th of August, 2019 at 6:30 p.m. Thank you for your attendance.